I'm still going to have a Mötley Crüe record playing up the tube. Tommy would dig me up and use my bones for...
The needle drops, the sound of a Mötley Crüe record fills the air, and for a moment the music feels immortal. But behind that wall of heavy riffs and wild anthems, there's a darker story, one of betrayal, struggle, and a fight for dignity. "If I'm ever gone, Tommy would dig me up and use my bones as a prop," Mick Mars once joked, masking decades of pain with gallows humor. At 73, Mick Mars, the man whose guitar gave Mötley Crüe its firepower, shocked fans by going public with explosive accusations against his own band. Claims of being cut out of profits, pushed aside without consent, and subjected to internal moves designed to strip him of his role as a founder. What seemed like a simple announcement about stepping back from touring unraveled into one of the most bitter disputes in rock history. The news blindsided fans who had always seen Mötley Crüe as larger-than-life outlaws, bound together by music and mayhem. Yet, as the dust began to settle, the truth looked far more fractured than the image the band projected. What was once celebrated as brotherhood appeared to be unraveling in real time, exposing not only legal conflicts but also the personal struggles of the man who quietly carried the band musically for decades. So, what really happened between Mick Mars and Mötley Crüe? To understand the fallout, we need to go back to where it all began, and to the man behind the riffs that defined an era. Mick Mars was born Robert Allen Deal on May 4, 1951, in Terre Haute, Indiana. His early years were far from glamorous. Growing up in a working-class household, money was always scarce, and dreams of fame seemed distant. Yet from an early age, Mars found solace in music. His parents couldn't provide much, but they recognized his passion and scraped together enough to get him his first guitar. By his teenage years, Mars was obsessed with rock and blues. He practiced relentlessly, trying to imitate the sounds of Muddy Waters, Jimi Hendrix, and Eric Clapton. While other kids were preoccupied with school dances or football games, Mick was holed up in his room, playing until his fingers bled. In the 1970s, he chased his dream to California, hoping to make it in the rock scene. What followed was nearly 2 decades of disappointment. Mick bounced from one obscure band to another, playing in dive bars and seedy clubs where no one remembered the names of the acts. He changed groups as often as he changed guitar strings, always searching for the right chemistry but never quite finding it. Rejection piled up, but instead of breaking him, it sharpened his resolve. Those lost years would shape his style, gritty, heavy, and infused with blues roots that later set him apart from the glam metal excesses of the 1980s. By the time he crossed paths with Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee in 1981, Mick Mars had more scars than success stories. Yet it was precisely this hardened perseverance that allowed him to recognize the potential in the wild, chaotic group that would become Mötley Crüe. From the very beginning, Mick Mars was more than just the guitarist. He was the architect of the band's sound. While Nikki Sixx provided the vision and Tommy Lee the flamboyant drumming, it was Mars who grounded Mötley Crüe in a sonic identity. The band's name itself was born from his ears. When a bandmate once described them as a motley-looking crew, it was Mick who suggested they keep it, stylized into the now iconic Mötley Crüe. That single stroke of inspiration didn't just brand the group, it reflected his quiet knack for shaping their identity. In the studio, Mars was different from his bandmates. While Sixx and Lee often lived up to their reputation of chaos and indulgence, Mars kept his focus on the music. Colleagues recall him as the first to arrive at recording sessions and the last to leave, his ever-present notebook filled with technical notes on each riff and solo. He treated his guitar like an extension of himself, perfecting tones that would fuel hits like Kickstart My Heart. Girls, 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 and Dr. Feelgood, Mick's sound was rooted in blues rock, and he refused to be swayed by fleeting trends. While glam metal bands of the 80s often leaned into flashy gimmicks, Mars insisted on heavy, riff-driven foundations. His approach gave Mötley Crüe songs a weight and authenticity that separated them from their peers. Without Mick's riffs, the band's catalog would likely have lacked the raw edge that made them stadium fillers. Sound engineers from Elektra Records, The label behind several of their albums frequently remarked on his consistency. Unlike other members who sometimes used substitutes or layered techniques in the studio, Mars insisted on playing every note himself. He carried his guitar everywhere, even backstage during press events, always refining, always practicing. On stage, his presence was different too. While Vince Neil strutted, Nikki Sixx stirred chaos, and Tommy Lee turned drumming into a circus act. Mick Mars often stood in the shadows, silently delivering the riffs that drove the spectacle forward. He wasn't the loudest member, but he was the one holding it all together. This contrast defined his role in the band. Less flamboyant, more disciplined, and ultimately irreplaceable. Without Mars's guitar, Mötley Crüe wouldn't have had its backbone. What makes Mick's contribution even more remarkable is the private battle he waged against his own body. At just 17, he was diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis, a rare and incurable form of arthritis that causes the spine to fuse over time. The disease inflicted constant pain, robbed him of mobility, and forced him to adapt his entire life around it. By the time Mötley Crüe achieved worldwide fame, Mick was already living in pain that most would find unbearable. In 2004, he underwent spinal fusion surgery and had metal rods inserted to stabilize his posture. Even then, the agony never disappeared. Every show, every tour, every guitar solo was delivered under the weight of suffering that fans couldn't see. Yet he never used the disease as an excuse. For over 4 decades, he performed on every studio album and every major tour. Industry insiders noted that he rarely, if ever, missed a show, even when he could barely stand. Most people would have retired decades earlier, one sound engineer recalled. But Mick Mars kept going night after night. Unlike his bandmates, who frequently made headlines for wild partying, substance abuse, and legal troubles, Mick avoided scandal. He lived quietly, almost reclusive compared to the crew's notorious reputation. This not only earned him respect among fans, but also made him the most admired member in online communities and metal forums, polls on Blabbermouth, and Metal Sludge repeatedly ranked him as the true professional of the band, the steady hand amidst chaos. While his bandmates chased tabloid attention, Mars built credibility through sheer resilience. Behind the glory of platinum records and sold-out stadiums, however, was a man enduring daily suffering. And as the years went on, the physical toll became harder to hide. On October 26, 2022, Mick Mars made the announcement that would forever alter the band's story. In a statement, he revealed he was retiring from touring, citing health reasons. He could no longer endure the grueling demands of performing on stage. But he emphasized one crucial point. He was not leaving Mötley Crüe. He remained an official member, with his rights and shares intact. The media picked up the story instantly. Outlets like Variety, Billboard, and Rolling Stone covered it, portraying it as a bittersweet moment. Fans were saddened but supportive, grateful for decades of dedication. Then came Mötley Crüe's response, and this is where the storm began. The band issued its own statement, confirming that John Five, a skilled guitarist known for his work with Marilyn Manson and Rob Zombie, would replace Mars on the ongoing tour. But unlike Mick's announcement, their statement carried no mention of his continued membership. Instead, it implied his departure was total. Even subtler, promotional materials for the tour were quietly updated. Mars's face was gone. His name was removed from posters. It was as if 4 decades of service had vanished overnight. Fans began to ask, was he pushed aside? The handling of the announcement sowed the first seeds of doubt. If Mick Mars was still a member, why erase him so quickly? Why not honor him publicly? For Mick, who had always kept to himself and avoided drama, this sudden erasure was both unexpected and painful. As weeks passed, the conflict grew harder to ignore. Fans noticed that in every piece of promotional material, interviews, tour photos, social media posts, Mick Mars was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the spotlight shifted entirely to John Five, who seemed seamlessly integrated into the band. Rumors spread fast. John Five had long been close with Nikki Sixx, fueling speculation that the move to replace Mick had been planned well before his official announcement. Was the band simply waiting for the right moment to push him out? Reports from inside sources suggested Mick was blindsided. He had expected to step back from touring while remaining part of the band's inner circle. Instead, decisions were made without his input. His independent nature, staying out of the financial and personal drama that dominated Crüe's history, suddenly became a weakness. He wasn't at meetings. He wasn't in the room where contracts were discussed. And slowly, his voting power and influence slipped away. By January 2023, it became clear Mick wasn't taking this quietly. News broke that he had met with lawyers in Los Angeles, preparing to challenge what he saw as an attempt to erase him. Meanwhile, the remaining members handled the situation with what many saw as coldness. Nikki Sixx posted cryptic tweets about team spirit and the new high-energy lineup, never mentioning Mick by name. Tommy Lee shared rehearsal photos with John 5, projecting excitement. Vince Neil stayed silent. To longtime fans, this felt like betrayal, an insult to the man who stood by them for over 40 years. The backlash was intense. Veteran rockers like Dee Snider of Twisted Sister and Tracy I. Guns of L.A. Guns spoke out in support of Mars, condemning the Crüe for disrespecting a founding member. On Reddit forums, debates raged over contracts, rights, and the band's moral obligations. The quiet withdrawal Mick had intended was no longer quiet. It was the beginning of a very public battle. On April 6, 2023, Mick Mars made it official. He filed a lawsuit against Mötley Crüe in the Los Angeles County Superior Court. For a band known for decades of wild scandals, this marked their most damaging internal conflict yet. The lawsuit laid everything bare. Mick accused his bandmates of conspiring to oust him, cutting his profit share from 25% to just 5%. He alleged that financial terms were altered behind closed doors by attorneys and the band's CFO without his knowledge or consent. According to his legal team, Mick never signed any document resigning from the band or transferring his ownership rights. The crux of his claim was simple. He remained a 25% owner, and no one had the right to reduce his share. To him, this wasn't just about money. It was about respect and recognition after decades of loyalty. The case electrified the music press. Variety and Deadline covered every update. Fans split into camps. Some defended the band's right to move forward, while many rallied behind Mick, seeing his lawsuit as a fight for fairness. The band, in turn, fired back through statements, accusing Mars of being unable to perform at the level required and denying any wrongdoing in the profit distribution. What had once been a hidden internal dispute was now center stage, exposing the fractures in one of rock's most notorious brotherhoods. Mick Mars's story is one of grit, pain, and unwavering dedication. For over 40 years, he gave Mötley Crüe its musical backbone while enduring a disease that would have sidelined most. He rarely sought attention, never courted scandal, and let his guitar do the talking. And yet, when his body finally forced him to step back, the band he helped build treated him as though he were disposable. What should have been a graceful retirement became a legal war, tarnishing the legacy of one of rock's most iconic groups. Still, for fans, the truth is undeniable. Without Mick Mars, there is no Mötley Crüe. His riffs, his work ethic, and his quiet resilience are woven into the DNA of the band's success. Whether the courts or public opinion will vindicate him fully remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. The music Mick Mars created will outlive the lawsuits, the betrayals, and the bitterness. His story is more than a rock feud. It is the portrait of a man who gave everything to his art, even when it cost him everything else. As soon as the news of Mick Mars stepping down and later filing a lawsuit hit the media, the story spread like wildfire across music outlets, mainstream press, and fan-driven platforms. Major publications such as Variety, Billboard, and Rolling Stone were among the first to report the details, framing the story as a clash between loyalty and business. These headlines drew immediate attention, painting Mick Mars as the quiet fighter finally standing up against a band long known for its volatility. Television networks that rarely covered hard rock stories, like CNN and BBC, ran features on the lawsuit. This elevated the issue beyond the rock community. positioning it as a cautionary tale of aging artists, financial exploitation, and the harsh realities of music as an industry. In contrast, some entertainment blogs sensationalize the conflict, presenting it as the latest rock soap opera, often focusing more on band drama than the underlying issues of health and fairness. On social media, the response was explosive. Hashtags like Justice for Mick and Team Mars began trending on Twitter. Fans created petitions demanding the band restore Mars's share, and Facebook groups dedicated to him grew rapidly, sometimes doubling in membership overnight. YouTube channels focused on classic rock and heavy metal, such as Rick Beato and Rock Feed, produced detailed breakdowns, analyzing not just the lawsuit, but also the broader implications for legacy bands still touring decades after their prime. For the fan community, it was more than gossip. Mick Mars represented stability, musicianship, and integrity. Many older fans who grew up with the band admitted they felt betrayed, as if their loyalty had been dismissed along with Mick's. Younger fans, discovering the Crüe through Netflix's The Dirt, were shocked to learn of the division behind the scenes, leading to debates about whether the band's resurgence had been built on an illusion of unity. The lawsuit became a public referendum. Was Mick Mars a victim of betrayal, or was he a man unwilling to step aside gracefully? While opinions varied, one thing became clear. This was no longer just an internal band feud. It had become a global conversation about loyalty, aging, and the true cost of fame. One of the most controversial aspects of the entire saga was the introduction of John 5 as Mick Mars's replacement. Known for his incredible technical skills and work with Marilyn Manson and Rob Zombie, John 5 had long been considered one of the most versatile guitarists in modern rock. His entry into Mötley Crüe should have been a celebrated moment, but instead, it was overshadowed by the storm surrounding Mars' departure. For fans, John 5's close friendship with Nikki Sixx raised eyebrows. Many suspected that his appointment had been planned long before Mars's retirement from touring was made official. Photos of John 5 jamming with Sixx surfaced online, leading to speculation that the replacement was not an emergency solution, but a premeditated move. While John 5 himself remained largely professional, avoiding direct comment on the controversy, his presence created unavoidable comparisons. Fan-uploaded videos on YouTube highlighted differences between John 5's stage performance and Mick Mars' raw, blues-inspired style. Some praised John 5 for his energy and technicality, while others argued that Mars' unique tone and feel could never be replicated. The band's public embrace of John 5 added fuel to the fire. Promotional photos and behind-the-scenes rehearsal clips featured him prominently, often without acknowledgement of Mick's decades of contribution. Tommy Lee posted rehearsal snapshots with John 5 celebrating new energy, which many interpreted as a dig at Mars. For John 5, the situation was a double-edged sword. Professionally, it was a career highlight to join such an iconic band, but personally, he found himself caught in the crossfire of a feud he didn't start. Fans debated whether he was a willing participant in the ousting or simply a musician stepping into a role offered to him. Ultimately, the John 5 factor highlighted the deeper issue. Mick Mars wasn't just a guitarist in Mötley Crüe. He was part of its soul. Replacing him wasn't just about filling a role on stage. It was about attempting to rewrite the band's very identity. At the heart of Mick Mars's lawsuit lay one undeniable truth. Mötley Crüe was not just a band. It was a multi-million-dollar business empire. From record sales to merchandise, publishing royalties to massive stadium tours, the financial pie was enormous, and the battle was ultimately over how it would be divided. Touring alone brought staggering sums. The 2022 stadium tour with Def Leppard reportedly grossed over $170 million, making it one of the most successful rock tours of the decade. With numbers like that, even a small percentage represented millions of dollars. Mick Mars's claim that his stake was slashed from 25% to just 5% meant a catastrophic financial loss. Merchandise was another major revenue stream. From T-shirts to collectible vinyl reissues, Mötley Crüe's brand had become a global product, According to industry insiders, Mars was still entitled to a quarter of these profits, yet the band allegedly moved to cut him out after his touring retirement. Mars argued that stepping away from live shows did not equate to surrendering ownership of the brand he helped create. The financial motivations were clear. If the band could legally reduce Mars's share, the remaining members, Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, and Vince Neil, would each gain a larger portion. To many observers, this was less about health or music and more about money. Music industry veterans quickly drew parallels to other infamous disputes: Journey's bitter fights over royalties, Pink Floyd's decades-long legal wars, and Queensryche's battle that split the band into two competing factions. In each case, money and control tore apart legacies built on decades of music. For fans, the financial revelations added a sour taste. It confirmed their suspicions that loyalty and history mattered less than profit margins. What once looked like a brotherhood now resembled a corporate boardroom fight, with lawyers and accountants deciding the fate of one of rock's most iconic names. One of the most divisive aspects of the feud was the question of health versus business. Mick Mars' condition, ankylosing spondylitis, had been public knowledge for years. His decision to stop touring was rooted in genuine physical limitations, yet he made it clear he never intended to step away from the band entirely. For supporters of Mars, this was an open and shut case. Here was a man who had given over 40 years of his life to the Crüe, enduring unimaginable pain just to play. To them, the idea of cutting his share because he could no longer handle the rigors of stadium touring was both immoral and exploitative. Critics, however, argued that business had to move on. Stadium tours required performers who could physically deliver, and if Mars couldn't keep up, the band had little choice but to replace him. They framed it as a pragmatic decision. The show must go on, and fans paying hundreds of dollars per ticket deserved the best performance possible. But this debate missed a larger point. Mick Mars had never missed recording sessions, always delivered in the studio, and remained committed to the music itself. His health limited his physical presence on stage, not his creative value. The business might have demanded fresh blood, but the legacy demanded respect. The health versus business debate ultimately boiled down to a question of ethics. Should loyalty to a founding member outweigh the cold logic of profit? For many fans, the answer was obvious. Without Mick Mars, the band might still tour, but it would never truly be Mötley Crüe. For decades, Mötley Crüe sold itself on the image of brotherhood. The band was more than just four musicians. It was a gang, a wild family that lived and died together. From the dirt to countless interviews, the mythology of unity was as central to their brand as the music itself, but the treatment of Mick Mars shattered that illusion. Suddenly, the brotherhood looked more like a business partnership, easily dissolved when inconvenient. Fans who once idolized the band's unbreakable bond now saw cracks in the facade. Stories began resurfacing about old tensions, fights backstage, long-standing resentments, and business disputes that had been papered over by the glamour of fame. While Mars had always been portrayed as the quiet, steady one, his isolation now seemed less like a personal choice and more like the result of being sidelined within his own band. The lawsuit forced fans to confront a painful truth. Mötley Crüe had never truly been the brotherhood it claimed to be. It was a band built on chemistry and image, yes, but also on fragile egos and financial maneuvering. For some fans, this revelation was devastating. For others, it was liberating, a reminder to separate the myth from the men behind it. Either way, the brotherhood narrative that had defined Mötley Crüe for decades was gone, replaced by a far harsher reality. As the controversy escalated, Mick Mars found support from unexpected corners of the rock world. Dee Snider of Twisted Sister openly blasted Mötley Crüe for their treatment of Mars, calling it a betrayal of the highest order. Tracy Guns of L.A. Guns chimed in with similar criticism, accusing the band of throwing away their most loyal member for the sake of greed. Other musicians offered subtler support. Tweets, interviews, and podcast appearances hinted at solidarity with Mars, even when names weren't directly mentioned. The unspoken message was clear. Within the rock community, loyalty still mattered, and the crew had crossed a line. This support carried weight because it reflected a deeper culture within rock. While rivalries and egos were common, there was also an unspoken code. Musicians stood by one another, especially when it came to founding members who had carried a band from obscurity to global stardom. Mars's allies reminded fans that what was happening wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a violation of that code. The outpouring of support gave Mars a moral high ground. Even as lawyers prepared for battle, the rock community seemed to rally behind him, framing him not just as a victim, but as a symbol of integrity in an industry that often discarded its own. As of now, the lawsuit between Mick Mars and Mötley Crüe remains unresolved, leaving fans to speculate on possible outcomes. If Mars wins, he could secure not only a financial settlement worth millions, but also vindication in the eyes of the public. Such a victory would reshape his legacy, transforming him from the quiet guitarist in the background to the man who stood up to an empire. If Mötley Crüe prevails, the band could move forward with a cleaner slate, solidifying John Five's role and maintaining control over their lucrative touring and merchandise business. However, such a victory would likely come at a steep cost: the permanent alienation of fans who see the treatment of Mars as unforgivable. A third possibility looms: settlement. Many legal analysts believe the most likely outcome will be a private agreement, with Mars receiving a buyout in exchange for dropping his claims. While this would avoid a prolonged legal battle, it would leave the truth forever obscured, with both sides spinning the outcome to suit their narrative. Looking further ahead, the conflict also raises questions about the band's long-term viability. With aging members, a fractured reputation, and a legacy increasingly tied to lawsuits rather than music, the crew faces an uncertain future. Will they be remembered as the wild rockers who defined an era, or as the band that betrayed one of its own at the finish line? In the end, Mick Mars's battle with Mötley Crüe is about more than contracts, money, or even music. It is about loyalty, resilience, and the cost of staying true to oneself in an industry that rarely rewards integrity. For over 4 decades, Mars stood as the quiet backbone of one of rock's loudest bands. He endured pain, rejection, and obscurity before finally tasting global success, only to face betrayal from the very brothers he helped create. His story resonates because it mirrors a universal truth. Sometimes, the greatest battles come not from outsiders, but from within the family you trusted most. Whether history remembers Mick Mars as the guitarist who built Mötley Crüe or the man who had to sue his own band for justice, his legacy is secure. He will always be the player who gave the crew its heavy edge, the anchor who never let the music lose its soul, and perhaps, in a twist of fate, his loudest statement wasn't made on stage or in a studio, but in a courtroom, standing tall, even when his body no longer allowed him to.